Imagine a time, right, when the lines between, say, science and spiritual exploration, they weren't so hard and fast.
Yeah.
That deep human pull towards the unknown, the things maybe beyond our normal senses, that's always been there, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's really compelling when you look back and see how people genuinely tried to map out those frontiers,
Yeah,
how fluid things were.
exactly. And that's why today we're doing a deep dive into this really fascinating historical text. It's called A Guide to Mediumship and Psychical Unfoldment by E.W. and M.H. Wallace.
Hmm.
And this isn't just some, dusty old book. It was meant as a practical handbook. It's been digitized by the Internet Archive thanks to Duke University Libraries, which is great.
Yeah, making it accessible.
And it was aimed at people back then who wanted to understand, maybe even develop their own psychic abilities or psychical unfoldment. That's the term they use.
Right. So our goal here really is to unpack what's inside, look at the core ideas, the actual advice they gave, and importantly, the ethical side of things they were considering.
We want to give you a shortcut, basically, to understanding this historical take on mediumship, but also on, well, self-development in a way.
Yeah, what did they think was key to connecting with the unseen? And what little nuggets of wisdom, maybe surprisingly relevant ones, did they offer for just personal growth?
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. To really get this guide, we need to understand their worldview. How did the Wallaces and others like them actually think about mediumship? What were the foundational ideas?
Well, right up front, the Wallaces make this pretty bold statement. They frame psychical investigation not just as interesting, but as the ultimate scientific frontier in their view.
Science.
Yeah. They quote figures like Reverend Minot J. Savage, who argued death wasn't an ending. It was more like a passing out of a spirit self to a more refined etheric movement.
Huh, so the spirit goes on.
Exactly. They believe spirits could still live its own free and glorious life. That belief, that sort of hopeful perspective, it really underpins the whole guide.
That is a powerful way to look at it. Not loss, but transition. And you mentioned that quote from L. Wheeler Wilcox in the book about an unseen cord which binds the whole wide world together.
It speaks to that feeling of universal connection, right?
Definitely.
And then you have someone like Camille Flammarion, who was actually a famous astronomer, but also a spiritualist. He claimed that positive observation proves the existence of a psychic world.
So, observation, like science.
For them, yes.
Mhm.
They believed it wasn't just faith, it was something you could potentially verify through experience, direct observation.
Okay, so moving from that kind of philosophical base,
Yeah.
they then tried to explain the how. They talked about the science of it all using this core idea of vibrations.
Right, vibrations. They propose that everything, all sensations, reality itself is down to these vibrations.
Mm-hmm.
And how fast or strong they are determines what we perceive.
So different vibrations, different realities almost.
That's what they suggested. That different planes of existence could literally coexist, side by side, but remain totally unknown to each other simply because their vibrations were different. They called this a scientific truth.
Wow. That's quite a leap for the time. It sounds almost like early quantum ideas in a way.
It's surprisingly prescient, yeah. Trying to build this sort of systematic, almost physics-like model for spiritual stuff.
And they applied this vibration idea to us too, connecting spirit, soul, and body.
Yes, they talked about the spirit, the soul, which they sometimes called the psychical body, and the physical body, and how much psychic ability someone expressed depended on their personal degree of responsiveness.
Like being tuned in, like an antenna.
Exactly like an antenna, finely tuned potentially to pick up these other frequencies, these other vibrations.
And that connects to mesmerism, doesn't it? The guide mentions it as
A stepping stone to spiritualism.
Yeah.
Mesmerism, inducing that kind of magnetic trance, was seen as proof. Proof that humans were sensitive to what they called positive mental forces.
It showed consciousness could operate outside the purely physical, in their view.
Precisely.
And some of the claims from mesmerism were pretty wild, right? Clairvoyance, seeing inside bodies or events far away, even talking to the dead.
Oh, absolutely. Extraordinary claim.
How did they explain that? Beyond just magnetic forces, what was the mechanism?
Well, they introduced the idea of the intelligent operator. That's the spirit. The spirit uses the medium's body like a machine or a human physical instrument.
Because the medium is the tool.
Essentially, yes. The medium becomes the bridge. Communication, they said, needed an intervening and uniting medium to cross the psychic bridge into the unseen. The medium was the interface between the spirit world and ours.
Okay, if the medium is that vital link, that bridge, Then it makes sense why they saw spiritualism itself as more than just beliefs. They called it the science of life.
Exactly. It was a path, a way to recognize what they called the immanent mind, the spirit divine. The ultimate goal was spiritual ascension.
Which explains that quote from Gerald Massey. Spiritualism will make religion infinitely more real.
For them, it wasn't just about contacting spirits. It was this profound journey of self-discovery, enlightenment even.
Okay, so they've laid out this whole worldview, this science of the unseen. The next logical step is, how do you actually do it? How do you develop these abilities?
And that's where the guide gets very practical, the art of development. They were clearly writing for people asking that exact question, inquirers and those who are developing their own mediumistic powers.
So it's a how-to guide.
Definitely. And a key point they make is that mediumship isn't some exclusive gift.
Oh.
No, they saw it as a natural quality, something potentially accessible to everyone. But, and this is crucial, its real value only came through spirit guidance. It wasn't about the medium's ego.
It had to serve a higher purpose.
Right. And before you even start trying to connect, they emphasized personal unfoldment. You needed earnestness and devotion.
That L. Wheeler Wilcox quote again. So many of us are shiftily shallying along life.
Yeah, it's a call for real commitment, self-improvement as the foundation.
So how did they recommend putting this into practice?
The main method they detailed was the spirit circle, a specific kind of gathering designed to make contact.
Like a seance.
Sort of, but maybe more structured, more intentional. They gave practical conditions. Use a three-legged table, agree on rules beforehand, keep the conversation pleasant. The goal was to cultivate an atmosphere of sincerity, sympathy, and cheerfulness.
Creating the right vibe, basically.
Exactly. And figures like Mrs. Emma Harding Britton, a big name in spiritualism, talked about how a facilitator could help attune the group's energy, create a magnetic influence.
It sounds almost like setting up for group meditation, but with a very specific aim.
It does, yeah. Focused consciousness exploration. The idea was to get everyone in sync, establish harmonious relations, which would help the medium become more responsive and reach that spiritual plane.
So the group's energy mattered just as much as the medium's.
Absolutely. They saw it as a collective effort, creating the right mental and emotional space for interaction.
But it wasn't always easy or safe, was it? The guide talks about dangers.
Oh, definitely. They were very clear about the risks. They warned strongly against mere dabbling or just using it for personal gratification.
Why? What was the danger in just dabbling?
They believed it could genuinely harm your mind, nerves, or health if you weren't serious, if you misused it. It shows how much responsibility they felt came with these practices.
So a strong ethical component.
Very strong. Mediums, they insisted, should never take any sides with spirits. They shouldn't let spirits dominate their reason.
Maintain your own judgment.
Yes, humility was key. And finding that rational course, as A. Morton put it, between being totally gullible, credulity, and being overly skeptical incredulity. Discernment was vital.
Because things could go wrong. They mentioned impersonating spirits.
Right. Spirits pretending to be someone they're not, maybe mischievous ones or even malicious ones. And they acknowledged unsatisfactory seances, times when it was just messy or hard to be sure who or what was communicating.
So they knew validation was a real problem.
They certainly wrestled with it. But they also pointed to evidence they found compelling, like the scientist Sir William Crookes, who studied the medium D.D. Home and vouched for the phenomena he saw, and for Holmes' own probity and sincerity.
And they mention others, like Miss Rowan Vincent.
Yeah, describing her clairvoyant experiences, giving descriptions of deceased relatives she apparently couldn't have known, seeing things at meetings of the London Spiritualist Alliance. They use these examples to argue that despite the difficulties, genuine, verifiable phenomena did exist.
Okay, so beyond the spirit circle and direct mediumship, the guide goes broader, right? Into something called psychical self-culture.
Yes, and this is really interesting. It shifts the focus. It's less about just being a medium and more about overall spiritual growth, cultivating self-knowledge, self-reliance, self-mastery, and self-expression.
For what purpose?
For spiritual illumination. Not just curiosity, but real inner development.
So it connects back to that idea of personal unfoldment being necessary.
Exactly. It's a holistic view. Psychic ability isn't some separate trick. It's part of becoming a more, well, evolved human being, you could say.
And how did they conceptualize the self in this context? You mentioned the soul, the spirit.
Right. They saw the spirit as distinct from the physical body, but connected. The connection point was this intermediary thing they called the perispirit, or etheric body. Gabriel Delane used that term.
An energy body.
Kind of, yeah. a subtle body linking spirit and flesh. They even touched on consciousness having layers, sub and supraliminal aspects, things below and above normal awareness. It's like an early intuitive stab at depth psychology.
Fascinating. And how did they suggest developing these inner abilities, this lucidity or inner perception?
Through things like mental abstraction, focusing the mind intensely, meditation, and self-suggestion. Affirmations almost. They even looped back to mesmerism, saying it could help induce these states of inner awareness.
So techniques to train the mind.
Yes. They believe these inner capacities weren't just random. They could be systematically cultivated.
What about the more esoteric stuff? Mystical, occult, and magical powers.
They addressed that too, but quite carefully. They warned against what they saw as exaggerated claims from, say, Eastern magic traditions.
They didn't dismiss it entirely.
No, they acknowledged inherent spiritual powers within people. They made a moral distinction, referencing Franz Hartmann, white magic for good, for healing or growth, versus black magic used selfishly for harm or personal gain.
A clear ethical line again.
Very clear. And that ties into their views on hypnotism, too. They warn about the use and abuse of hypnotism, caution against dodgy, disreputable practitioners.
Because it could be misused.
Yes. They stress the need for self-protection through developing your own willpower and self-control. They understood these forces, this influence, could be exploited if you weren't strong and centered yourself.
That sense of responsibility seems to run through everything, even into physical health.
Absolutely. They saw a profound link between physical and spiritual well-being. Good habits weren't just about the body. The value of good habits was seen as crucial for shaping the mind, building mental and spiritual strength.
It's really holistic.
Very. Their health advice gets quite specific. Diet, for instance. They mentioned Dr. Dewey's idea of the brain as a self-feeding organ. They praised fruits. They were even wary of cooked food sometimes.
That sounds surprisingly modern in some ways.
It does, echoes of raw food ideas or certain health philosophies today. And it wasn't just diet. Exercise, fresh air, rest, all seen as vital.
Why? What was the connection for them between, say, eating fruit and psychic ability?
They believed it was about refining the physical instrument, making the body a clearer channel for those subtle vibrations we talked about earlier. Purer fuel, cleaner signal, maybe?
Okay. And breathing.
Deep breathing was highlighted as really essential. Essential for physical vitality, yes, but also for spiritual energy. They thought it directly affected your magnetic life forces and could help you overcome negative emotions.
Again, feels very contemporary breathwork, mindfulness.
It really does. And this connects to healing, too. They discuss magnetic and spirit healing.
How did they explain that?
As channeling vital or magnetic force. The healer acts as a conduit for this energy. They even gave practical instructions like using laying on hands for headaches or nerve pain.
Like energy healing today.
Very similar concepts. Dr. Gene Clark is quoted saying, "When the mind has full magnetic connection with every organ in the body, health prevails." So health was about this energetic connection, this flow, maintained by the mind.
It was an active transfer of energy to restore balance.
Right, a direct application of their whole vibrational theory.
So, okay, we've gone from the basic beliefs about spirits and vibrations through the spirit circle, developing abilities, and now this whole self-culture part, mind, body, spirit. What's the final takeaway, the ultimate goal of all this unfoldment?
Well, the guide ends with a really grounding message, actually. It says that psychic development, clairvoyance, all that stuff, it shouldn't dominate your everyday life.
Ugh, after all that focus on developing it.
Yeah. They remind the reader that life is full of duties and practical responsibilities. You still have to live in the world.
So balanced.
Exactly. True unfoldment, they argue, is harmonious all around. It should bring joy, wisdom, and crucially, the ability to serve others. It's not just for personal kicks.
And that connects to that lovely quote, "The inner side of every cloud is bright and shining."
It suggests that even when life's tough, this path of holistic growth, this spiritual awareness, brings an underlying sense of purpose and positivity. It's a message that kind of resonates beyond just their specific beliefs, I think.
Definitely. So we've really covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from their basic ideas about mediumship, the spirit world, to the nitty-gritty of development circles, and then this bigger picture of psychical self-culture, that whole person approach.
Yeah, looking at this guide to mediumship and psychical unfoldment really shows how people historically tried to bridge these different worlds, science, psychology, spirituality. It was all part of this unified search for understanding ourselves and, our place in the universe.
It's such a fascinating window into that ongoing human quest, isn't it? The drive for self-improvement, for connection to something bigger.
It really is.
So maybe something for you listening to think about. What does looking back at this kind of historical spiritualism tell us about that constant human effort, that effort to reconcile the world we can touch and see with the world we sense might be just beyond?
Yep.
And how do you think that quest is still evolving today?